Well, I'm not gonna lie, we had other plans for this Sunday. We could have gone for our Evoker guide, we could have gone for the new series of Road to Keystone Master on a new character, perhaps even on the video about who is more important and more difficult between DPS, tank and healer, in Mythic Plus especially, or maybe even our weekly update on Mythic Plus. However, we have to take all of that on the side for today because Blizzard has decided to take a stop here and drop a new round of balance tuning for 10.0.5, coming out in just a couple of days. This one bringing out even more changes perhaps than the initial round of changes we saw from 10.0.5, especially to some of the more lacking specs we have been lamenting had not received any changes in the previous round of tuning of the patch. So it is worth going to revisit exactly what is Blizzard going to add to this patch. We are starting our entire list of changes with a step back, and in this time to Balance Druid, because Blizzard is apparently not that certain that this change to Balance Druid was the right one. Lunar Eclipse now increases the splash AoE damage to other targets by 30% instead of 50%. It's funny that in their development notes they mentioned that the redesign of Lunar Eclipse proved to be a bit overtuned during testing, considering that Balance Druid is already overtuned in AoE damage. In the wide, many targets consistent AoE damage is pretty much what they excel in at the moment. So this change in 10.0.5 to make Lunar Eclipse no longer give you extra crit chance but splash AoE damage was just going to make them even stronger in what they were already strong at. So it is a reasonable nerf. Now, what is an even more reasonable nerf, which will also start some debate, of course, is the nerf to Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid finds itself with Verdancy healing reduced by 10%. Verdancy is one of the all-stars talents of Restoration Druid, in particular when it comes to Mythic Plus. Let's just say that the Mythic Plus meta of Restoration Druid is going down the left side of their talent tree, which gives you double Life Bloom. You Life Bloom 2 targets, with the 2 targets Life Bloomed, you're going to proc the full bloom of Life Bloom multiple times, and Verdancy is going to proc AoE healing to your party multiple times. This is a 1 talent point which accounts for roughly 10% of your total healing and is not even in your last bracket of talents. It's in your mid bracket of talents. For 1 talent point, 10% overall healing. It's a massive power. In terms of the amount of talent points you have to spend, having that much healing for just 1 talent point and not even in the last bracket of talents is very, very powerful, perhaps the most powerful talent you have at the moment as a Resto Druid. You then also have a nerf to Adaptive Swarm. The healing and damage done by Adaptive Swarm has been reduced by 10%, as well as the extra hot effectiveness given by Adaptive Swarm goes from 25 to 20%. This is definitely the stronger part of Adaptive Swarm. Adaptive Swarm is not really going to account for too much damage for you and not really going to account for too much healing either. It's more about the empowering your other hots. That was the strong part of Adaptive Swarm for Resto Druid. And lastly, Dream State now reduces cooldowns by up to 20 seconds while channeling Tranquility instead of 15. Blizzard, of course, points out that they are making targeted adjustments primarily aimed at Restoration Druid's Mythic Plus performance, rather than their raid performance. Because, as mentioned, their raid build doesn't really go for Verdancy, doesn't really go for double Life Bloom, doesn't really go for Adaptive Swarm. So these nerfs are not really going to affect the raid version of Resto. Then you have Mages. Now, I mentioned before, if you remember, Blizzard is contractually obligated to buff fire once a month until they become meta. Now, this time they are pulling a double shift because they already buffed fire in the hotfixes of January 9th. So now we have a double buff on January for Fire Mage. All ability damage increased by 5%. Frost Mage gets the same treatment, all ability damage increased by 5%. Now, some players have already lamented this same point. It looks like both Fire and Frost keep receiving these aura modifier damage increases, these flat damage increases. However, it feels like they need some more changes to their talents, to their core rotations and their core mechanics to make them more viable again, rather than just continuing to buff their numbers until their abilities hit for enough to make them viable, which is at the moment what Blizzard is aiming at, apparently, for both of these specs. Then we have a couple of tiny changes for 2 healers and then massive changes for 1 healer. The tiny changes are to Mistweaver. Lesson of Despair now increases your critical strike chance while above 50% HP instead of 80% HP. So now it is much more likely to be maintained as a buff. And also then we have this pathetic change for Holy Paladin. Barrier of Fate now accumulates 50% of effective Flash of Light and Holy Light healing instead of 40%. I thought I was clear with this before the expansion even launched. Stop trying to make hard casting Paladin happen. It's not going to happen. Guess what happened now? Paladin has half their talent tree wasted in a bunch of Flash of Light and Holy Light talents that nobody is taking because the build just doesn't work. So buffing this talent is not going to do anything. It's just a waste for Holy Paladin. As I mentioned, there were 2 tiny changes for healers, but 1 big change, which is to Discipline. We already covered the massive changes to Discipline in the original planned 10.0.5. Now, these buffs are doing even more for the group version, the 5-man, the Mythic Plus version of Discipline. Flash Heal and Renew Healing has been increased by a massive 25% flat for both of them. So this is going to make spot healing, quick, fast, reactive healing in Mythic Plus much more viable for Discipline. Power Word Radiance now has been increased in its healing by 100%, and the talent Ultimate Radiance to increase the healing goes down from 100% to 10. The TLDR is that now you don't have to spend 1 talent point extra to make Radiance heal for much more. Now you just get the base healing of Power Word Radiance once you take the talent to be much higher. Even more buffs to Sins of the Many, which is going to increase the damage by 40% at its highest peak instead of 30%. Remember that before this expansion even launched, this talent used to cap at 12%. Now we have gone up all the way to 40% more damage effectiveness. Lastly, Divine Aegis creates a protective shield for 3 to 6% of the critical healing done instead of 5 to 10%. So less important, of course, when it comes to Mythic Plus groups, and more important when it comes to spread, massive, wide, heavy healing when it comes to a raid environment. Now, if you remember, in 10.0.5 we had a whole list of buffs, except for 1 spec, which was nerfed. That was Outlaw. We are going to continue this trend in this additional round of tuning for 10.0.5 because one of the 2 specs which will be nerfed today is once again going to be Outlaw. Combat stamina bonus of Outlaw goes from 10 to 5%. This was already very confusing as to why exactly Outlaw deserved to have a 10% flat extra stamina in the first place. Even a 5% extra stamina as a talent point is still weird to give Outlaw, but at the very least now Blizzard is addressing this PowerPoint that Outlaw has. The other change is a little bit more niche, which is the change to Killing Spree, which was planned in 10.0.5 to give the rogue 65% damage reduction while in Killing Spree. Now it's gone down to 35%. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe this was going to have some potential to use in PvP because of the damage reduction. Maybe it could have had some use to cheese some mechanics in Mythic Plus with the 65% damage reduction. At the moment, Killing Spree is mostly used as a filler. If you have absolutely nothing else to press and you have low energy, Killing Spree was just being used as an energy regenerator for Outlaw. It didn't have much of any other use, so I don't think this change is too important for Outlaw. However, what's important is that finally we get to reach the Shaman part of the video and we don't get to meme the class because we have no changes. To be fair, these changes can still be considered memes because they don't address anything and both of these specs will still have problems. At the very least, we are getting towards baby steps. So, Healing Surge healing has been increased by 15% for all of the class. Mana Spring Totem now regens twice as much mana for all of the class, and Totemic Surge now reduces the cooldown of your totems by 3 to 6 seconds instead of 2 to 4 seconds. So these are still just generic bonus changes. The actual focused changes to Elemental. Flame Shock damage has been increased by 10%, Chain Lightning damage increased by 10%, as well as Lava Beam and Earthquake damage increased by 10%. All of this is trash. It's not really changing anything of Elemental. Earthquake has been ultra nerfed before the release of Dragonflight, and it's not a 10% buff that is going to fix the problem of that ability. Same goes for the pitiful damage of Chain Lightning, hard capped at 5 targets, and also the damage of Flame Shock. So it's good that you finally see Elemental being included in the list of buffs. It's bad that these buffs are not really that powerful. Kind of the same theme for Restoration Shaman. Healing Wave healing has been increased by 6%. Acid Rain damage has been increased by 120%, Flame Shock damage and Lava Burst damage increased by 20% for Resto Shaman, as well as Master of the Elements, increasing the effectiveness of the next Nature, Physical or Frost spell by 20% instead of 10. Most of these talents for Resto Shaman are actually buffing their damage and not their healing. Because the problem being, of course, that most of this damage is still damage that the Resto Shaman will hardly be able to gain advantage of because they will be busy healing. As mentioned, one of the biggest issues of a Resto Shaman is that they have to stop healing completely if they want to do damage. Something that was able to be bypassed in Shadowlands thanks to tools like Vesper Totem, Raging Vesper Vortex legendary, as well as Deep Tremor Stone legendary for your Earth Elemental. So abilities that could do damage while you were healing. These were all tools that they lost in Dragonflight and were given back nothing because Acid Rain as a tool to continue doing damage while you heal was pathetic. Now with this 120% damage increase, it's going to get better, but still, it's likely a bit too late and also a bit too little to impact Restoration Shaman for the moment. After Shaman, you have two very tiny changes to Warlock, mostly forgettable. Harvester of Souls for Affliction is buffed by 25%. This won't impact the spec too much whatsoever. Also, this is more relevant, however. Demo gets noticed by Blizzard. Reign of Tyranny causes your Demonic Tyrant to deal 7% additional damage for each stack of Demonic Servitude instead of 5%. This is an attempt to bolster their single target damage. Their AoE damage is somewhat fine, however, their single target is where they suffer more nowadays, which is kind of funny, because that's what Demonology used to be strong in, whereas now the tables have turned, and now it's one of the weaker points of Demonology. We arrive at the final and also most changed class of today's video, which is going to be Warrior. Despite the several changes of both Arms and Fury in 10.0.5, we are getting even more now, because Arms gets Thunderclap buffed by 30%, Cleave buffed by 5% in damage, Whirlwind damage increased by 10%, Bladestorm by 5%, and Rend initial damage, not the dot, increased by 15%. Funny comment by Blizzard, they are trying to increase their performance in AoE in dungeons and raids. They feel like it hasn't been where we would like relative to other specs. You don't say. You don't say Arms has a shit AoE. What a discovery by Blizzard. It's good that it only took them 5 months of PTR and beta and alpha of this expansion and then almost 2 months of this expansion to realize that this was one of the weaknesses of Arms Warrior. Well, at the very least, better late than never. Fury also continues to get buffed. Raging Blow, Rampage and Bloodthirst damage increased by 10% and then Execute and Annihilator damage increased by 15%. And finally, Bloodbath increased by 5%. These are significant buffs, because these are all abilities that Fury Warriors use consistently. If you look at their damage done, their most damage done is done with Crushing Blow, which is, their enraged, rampaged Raging Blow, and then Execute, and then Rampage. And all of these three abilities are getting significantly buffed by 10 and 15%. It looks like Blizzard is being the crutch, the band-aid of this spec. As they mentioned, despite a strong start to Season 1, Fury's performance has fallen behind where we would like it to be. Funny. I find it quite funny how it is Blizzard who arbitrarily decides who gets to remain meta based on this type of thinking. We have had in the past plenty of specs starting up strong and then getting weaker with time, because they scale badly with gear, they scale badly with tier sets, they scale badly with borrowed powers, so they end up becoming weaker and weaker as the time goes by. Fury Warrior was in the same position, except all of that is removed because Blizzard decides to buff them massively to keep them relevant. So I guess this time it's Fury who rolled high. They rolled a 94, won the roll, and got babysat by Blizzard for this first season in Dragonflight. However, we are starting to get a few worse rolls for Protection Warrior. I don't think it's anywhere close to the bad roll they needed to get to be overthrown as the meta tank. The nerfs for Prot are Brace for Impact now increases block value by 3% per stack instead of 5%. Brutal Vitality now causes 10% of the damage you deal to add to your Ignore Pain instead of 15%, and Shield spec now increases block value by 12% per rank instead of 15% per rank. So they are nerfing the block, and in general they are nerfing the physical damage taken power of Protection Warrior, not nearly as much their magical damage taken, which is still overall not as powerful of a nerf. I also found it quite the hilarious description of Blizzard in their developer notes. They point out how Protection Warriors are currently dominating tank populations. So their plan to fix this is, we are making some small talent adjustments. You just pointed out they are dominating tank populations. So why are you making small talent adjustments? If they are dominating all tank populations, you should be making massive talent reworks, not small talent adjustments to the spec. Because of course, if they are already dominating, then small talent adjustments are not really gonna change anything, which is exactly what's gonna happen after these nerfs go live for Protection Warrior. So with this list of changes done for 10.0.5 to be added to the original initial list of changes of the patch, now we have a more complete picture. We pointed out how certain specs were famously missing: Protection Warrior nerfs, Elemental Shaman and Restoration Shaman buffs not being present. Now added together to the whole list of the patch, they make a little bit more sense. They hit a few more of the specs. We still have, surprisingly, no extra changes to Survival and no extra changes to Beast Mastery Hunter. Those perhaps are a couple of the surprising misses we have for this patch. Beyond those two, it looks like Blizzard has taken a look at most of the other specs at the moment. So, with this second part of the patch being looked over, I'm going to leave you to whatever you think these changes, this balance tuning is going to do to the specs, in particular, of course, to your main characters, the ones you play. If you think like these changes were good enough or bad enough to change anything, to change something about your spec. I think the bigger one of the changes at the moment is going to be the buff to Discipline, as well as the 2 buffs to the Warrior specs. They have been buffed a lot in patch 10.0.5, perhaps the most buffed specs in this upcoming patch are going to be the 2 Warrior specs. So with this out of the way, it's time to leave each other on this Sunday. Of course, we're gonna start by leaving each other and thanking all of my Patreon supporters for contributing and helping the growth of this channel. You can still, as usual, support in other ways, not including the expenditure of money. Liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself, are perfectly fine ways to show your support. You can also support even more by following me on Twitter whenever you want to get notified, for example, whenever I go live on stream or I have any kind of communication to give out to all of my viewers. That would be the place to check out. And lastly, technically, I should be, I'm told, live streaming on Twitch as well, starting around 10 PM Central European times, 1 PM Pacific and 4 PM Eastern US time zones. With this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, the throat is getting dry, has been getting drier the deeper we have gone into this video, so it's time to make my usual reserve of hot tea for the evening. Let's go!